Please remember, the views expressed on Albertans in Space by our guests and host alike are opinions and do not represent the entire industry as a whole. Our podcast serves only as a platform, and all topics discussed are primarily for educational purposes only.
I was always a big dreamer as a kid, and no one ever told me that, don't waste your time on dreams. So when I was 4 and didn't know what job prospects actually were, I was like, I'm gonna be a superhero. I'm gonna be like a transformer with Optimus Prime. We're gonna fight crime. And then when I became more mature, I was like, okay, let's be an astronaut. And then I was like, well, is that something you're going to go to school for? So then in high school, I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And then that kind of stuck with me, and I set my sights on neuroscience and medicine, all the while keeping in mind that space, was something I loved.
Welcome to Albertans in Space, the series where we talk to Albertans making waves in the local and global space industry. In today's episode, Dr. Shawna Pandya joins us to talk about medical technologies that are being developed here in our province and to assist doctors keeping astronauts alive. I'm your host, Zach Trolley.
And I'm the co-host and favorite space alien, Meghan Westelmajer. Zach, what did the astronaut do when it crashed into the moon?
I don't know. What did the astronaut do when it crashed into the moon?
It apologized. The clip you just heard was from the Story Hive short documentary titled Dr. Cosmonaut, Shawna Pandya. It was made in 2016 by some pretty talented Alberta filmmakers.
Albertans in Space is filmed in the city of Calgary on Treaty 7 territory. This land, traditionally called Mohkinsis, belongs to many nations and people who make their home here, and we honor the traditions taught by our elders to acknowledge the generosity of Mother Earth and take care of our land as we transition and expand into new worlds.
I think it's so cool that Shawna grew up in Sherwood Park.
Have you ever been there?
I've never been there. I've been to Edmonton a bunch of times, and I have driven through it, and I didn't know that very cool space experts live there.
I've been amazed at all the people we've met and all the expertise that this province has, and it's just crazy to me to believe that they could be living down the street and you wouldn't even know. I'm so very excited to talk to her. She is amazing. Last episode, we talked to Dr. Michael Gallagher. We talked about the kind of effects on the human body, all the squishy parts. And now we're going to talk to Shawna, and she's going to talk about the technology and the equipment and what's it like to integrate that into space.
Since childhood, the high-achieving Dr. Shawna Pandya has always had big dreams and has never shied away from any of her aspirations. She is a research astronaut with the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, the IIAS for short, as well as the director of the IIAS Space Medicine Group and chief instructor of the IIAS Space Medicine course. She's a physician working in rural emergency rooms all across Alberta, with additional degrees in neuroscience and space studies. Additionally, Dr. Pandya is an aquanaut, a speaker, a martial artist, an advanced diver, a skydiver, a pilot in training, VP of Immersive Medicine with Luxonic Technologies, and a fellow of the Explorers Club.
That's a few things.
Wow, okay. With her vast experience and expertise, she has paved the way for advancements in space medicine and spacesuit technology. In 2020, Dr. Pandya was named one of the Women's Executive Network's top 100 most powerful women in Canada. In 2022, Dr. Pandya was named as one of the Explorers Club EC 50 Explorers Changing the World. As of June 2024, Dr. Pandya was announced to be the first named Canadian female commercial astronaut and will be flying aboard the Virgin Galactic Delta class. Notably, she is recognized for being the 4th Indian origin female astronaut to date. This is huge. I am getting chills just thinking about talking to her.
And it's really cool that she's flying on Virgin Galactic.
Isn't that Richard Branson's company?
Yeah, he invested in the company Scale Composites. That's a company that won the Ansari X Prize back in 2004. And he founded Virgin Galactic using that technology. And now they're building space planes and flying commercial space missions.
I'm sorry, what is Scaled Composites?
They're a prototype rocket company, and they've been in business longer than I've been alive. So folks been at this for a while, and they created a unique 2-stage space plane. So it's not a rocket. It's a massive plane with huge wings, and
It doesn't look like it should go to space. It
No.
feels like it should go to like Vancouver Island.
But to win the X Prize back in 2004, they had to fly into space, fly a person into space, land the craft, refurbish it, and fly it again in 2 weeks. So really emulating commercial airline flight, and they're trying to bring that into space. And they've been doing that. And now we're going to talk to one of the astronauts that is flying up on one of those missions.
Commercial space flight is something I never thought would exist. I thought it was something that was a NASA approved mission or a CSA, a Canadian Space Agency approved mission to go into space. And you needed to be trained to do that. Commercial space flight opens up a lot of discussion, which we could get into. People have a lot of opinions about, like whether we should be doing commercial space flights. Off topic, we'll save that for another season. What I do know now that I didn't know before, especially with our pre-interview with Shawna, is that there are some pretty amazing things that are happening with commercial space flights right now. It's pushing the limits of discovery in ways that haven't been explored before. Not just of places in space, but discovering technologies and how traveling in space affects the human mind and the body. And I believe that's kind of where the main goal of commercial space flight is focused currently.
You know, you see these specific missions and payloads that are being developed, not through government programs, but through companies and sponsorships, and just trying out things that maybe the government isn't willing to try out, or is a little bit, before its time. So it's going to take all kinds of people, and it's a really exciting time.
It's also super exciting who we're talking to today. I think it's incredibly groundbreaking that Dr. Shawna Pandya is the 4th Indian origin female astronaut to date.
Like total, not Canadian.
To date, yeah. Like this is a huge representation, and representation matters. She's not just an inspiration for young women and girls of color who can see themselves in the STEM world now, but she should be an inspiration to literally everyone who's ever had a dream. So I'm really excited to talk to her today about her thoughts on being named that and going to space.
Absolutely. And I know this is a dream come true for her, and she's going to be on to tell us all about it. Not only is she now going to be an astronaut, but she's also an expert in methods and medical technologies used to ensure the health and well-being of astronauts.
So what does that mean? How does space medicine technologies function in space? And what does operating it look like?
Well, you know what? We're about to find out. Welcome, Shawna. Thank you for coming to Albertans in Space. You officially put the Albertans in Space into Albertans in Space. Congratulations on your upcoming flight. That's so exciting.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And you're right, the term Albertans in Space is especially apt with the recent announcement, which I'm sure we'll talk about this episode.
Let's jump right in it. Tell us about your news. What's going on?
I'm going to space as early as 2026. So for those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Shawna Pandya, and I have wanted to be an astronaut ever since I was a kid. And as of June 20th, 2024, the announcement went live that I will be flying to space with the new class of Virgin Galactic spacecraft, the Delta spacecraft, as early as 2026 on a research mission as a suborbital scientist. So I will be flying with the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. I've been involved with this amazing, stellar, some might say, institution since 2015. I direct the space medicine group. I teach their space medicine courses, and I've been a researcher with the organization for 9 years. And I was the lead scientist on our first research mission, which was a suborbital mission as well. I was one of the lead scientists, I should say. And our first astronaut 001 at our institute is one of my crewmates on this mission. Her name is Kelly Girardi, and I'm the second named astronaut. So I get the designation of astronaut 002.
What does this mean for you specifically? What does it mean for humankind?
What a great question. Personally, this has been a lifetime in the making. I was lucky enough to be a child of the 90s watching Dr. Roberta Bondar, Canada's first female astronaut, fly to space. And I thought, oh my gosh, we can do that. Well, that's cool. I want to do that. So to do what she does, maybe I just need to follow her path. And so I said, she's a neuroscientist, a physician, and then an astronaut. So, okay, let me go study neuroscience at the University of Alberta, go get my MD again at the University of Alberta, and then hopefully I get to be an astronaut. And it seems to have worked out.
I just love how casually you drop, yeah, I'm going to become a neuroscientist. Easy.
Well, when you're a kid, you just, break things down into really, really manageable steps. Sky is not the limit. And I think that was really a really great North Star to follow as I navigated what I would do in life and how I would go about it. And yeah, so personally, it's incredible. I think the smile says it all. The only thing better than flying to space is flying to space with your friends, and I get to embark on this amazing research mission with Kelly, who is just an incredible operator, an incredible astronaut, and an amazing human being. And then another senior colleague at the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, Dr. Nora Patton. She's a PhD. She's an engineer. She's an amazing human. She's been part of our institute for the better part of for 70 plus years now. And she will be Ireland's first astronaut as well. And so
I was going to say, she's the first one, isn't it? Like ever.
Yeah, she's the first named Irish astronaut assigned to a mission, which is extraordinarily exciting. The amount of positive reception, the upcoming generation, the current generation of young women in STEM fields who, approach us on social media, send us really positive messages. For me personally, more than a few conversations with young undergraduates who didn't know that space medicine was a thing, and they're starting to see a path for that, especially if they, come from a country that traditionally didn't have those opportunities. So I just got a message from El Salvador last night, which was really cool. And to the point about inspiration and how much of an impact it has on these burgeoning professionals, these young women. I was giving a keynote actually at the University of Alberta about 6 years ago to a group of women in STEM. And this young lady, she was an engineer, and she came up to me afterwards and she said she was of Southeast Asian descent. And she said, seeing someone like you up there makes me feel like I can do this. And that really underscored the value of representation for me. And then just doing it in a way that's truly authentic. Anyone who follows my teammate Kelly online, she is unabashedly herself. There's a whole theme of Taylor Swift being your own boss, doing it in a way that's authentic to yourself. And she even brought her own friendship bracelets on her mission. And so to underscore how powerful that is, this young lady found me at this conference. I was at the space conference I was at this past week. And she said, I hope it's okay, but I made you and the team specific friendship bracelets specific to your mission. And they were so cool. The one said Space Barbie, one said Bioastronautics on it. And it's like, right, you're just bringing the best of all these worlds. So it really underscores the power of, going to space on your terms and doing it in a way that, it just brings everyone along for the ride. And so then to the final part of your question, we are living in the era of commercial space. We have seen commercial space literally take off since 2021. And this really is the beginning of a whole new era of access to space. And my hope is that those who may be following along and watching our journey, see a place for themselves in space, whether it's as an engineer, whether it's as an artist, whether it's as a storyteller, and, thinking about how we get to space as a species, what it means for humanity.
Amazing.
That's so eloquently put. And yes, representation matters. And I know that there are so many young women globally who are going to be looking at what you're doing and say, wow, I want to do that too. You are getting to explore things that, young Shawna and young women everywhere would love to have the opportunity to do.
I think you hit on a topic we've talked about all through this podcast, that space has many avenues. There's lots of different ways to participate in space. You're obviously very involved in space medicine. So what is that? What is space medicine? Is it just doctors in space? What's it all about?
Yeah. So when we talk about space medicine and what is it, and why does it exist as a field? Initially I got a lot of strange looks like, what are those two terms and why did you just, state them in tandem right after each other? Until you consider the hazards of the space flight environment, and especially that space is trying to kill you. And so that's very reductive. But when we talk about the challenges of the spaceflight environment, we talk about the RIDGE framework. We talk about radiation, isolation, confinement, distance from Earth, altered gravity environments, and then the environment, which can be anything from altered day-night cycles. So on the space station, 400 kilometers on average above Earth, you experience 16 sunrise sunset cycles per 24-hour period.
That's not normal. Not a lot.
No,
That's like no.
yeah, slightly a shock to the circadian rhythm, and so that's a sunrise sunset every 90 minutes, and it's there's a lot to adjust to up there. Like at the level of the ISS, you're scheduled down to the 5-minute mark. There can be a lot of vibration. There can be a lot of input. So really, the practice of space medicine is talking about how we keep astronauts performing at their best, how we mitigate risk, and how we ensure both optimal health and not just surviving, but thriving in space and ensuring mission success.
I can't imagine what needs to happen with the technologies that are being built to actually perform any kind of medicine or medical work in space. Can you tell us a bit about the neuroarm? I don't have any kind of context at all. So explain it to me, the person who knows nothing.
So once I was on the metro in Calgary, and I got off of the train, and then I saw this ad, and it was very jarring. It said, "That's when the robot entered my brain." And
that's not a normal thing to say in conversation. That's
and it was actually an ad for neuroarm. So for those who don't know, it is a neurosurgical robot based on Canadarm technologies, and it's developed at the University of Calgary. And so it's manufactured, it's made by MDA. That's the same space company that's responsible for Canadarm, which is our robotic arm in space that is so critical for maintenance and repairs on spacewalks outside the space station, and also during the shuttle era. And basically, when we talk about the spin-off, spin-in technology, a lot of that same technology, for example, actuators, were used to create this robot that can help enhance neurosurgical procedures. And so, there are probably some out there who are listening to this and saying, robot brain?
you don't want that walking around inside your skull. Yeah.
This sounds a little bit uncomfortable. And so
sus. The kids are saying sus these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds sus, as the kids would say. And so I heard of this project. I was freshly off my master's at the International Space University. I did a master's in space science there. I had learned that this whole field of space medicine exists. I had completed an internship at the European Astronaut Center, which is a division of the European Space Agency. I worked with their crew medical support office. So I was bitten by the space medicine bug, and I just had started medical school, and I was feeling the withdrawal from the space ecosystem and was looking for a way to inject myself back into space, and ideally space medicine. So I was in my second year of medical school, and I heard about this project called NeuroArm, and based off Canadian space technologies. And also there was a surgical aspect and there was a neuroscience aspect. So I thought, sign me up. And so I just simply emailed the lead neurosurgeon, Dr. Garnet Sutherland, who has recently been awarded the Order of Alberta, actually, for his work on NeuroArm. And I said, hey, do you need a keen medical student? Here's my background. I love space. I love neuroscience. I love surgery. Sign me up. Put me in coach. I'm ready. And he was so kind. He, being the busy surgeon he still took time to reply and said, yeah, we applied for joint funding for a research project, and I got it. And I moved down to Calgary for the summer. And we were responsible for seeing through and writing up the preclinical testing of NeuroArm. And so I haven't fully answered the question, like, other than sounding super cool, what is the advantage of a neurosurgical robot? And in fact, when we talk about what NeuroArm offers, it offers enhanced surgical ability at a smaller scale. So typically surgeons work at the millimeter scale. With the NeuroArm, you can actually even have more precision, so down to the micrometer scale. So which is really critical if you're trying to resect or take out as much of a tumor as possible.
I'll take your word for it. I haven't worked on many tumors in my life, so.
You mean you don't routinely perform brain surgery with a robot?
No, I don't have a neuroarm of my own, but if I did, maybe I would.
We can wait till Amazon Prime Day and see if there's any deals. Yes, it also offers tremor filtration. So again, you don't want to have any kind of jitter. You want to be able to operate with the utmost precision. And then coming to the idea of, being able to image what part of a tumor is still left versus what has been resected or taken out. The robot is MRI compatible, so you can actually leave the room as a surgeon. If you're in the operating theater that has an MRI, you can leave the robot in there. You can kind of scan the brain and then just see what else you need to do.
And this is all happening at the University of Calgary?
Yeah. So I was responsible for writing up the preclinical testing. What the robot could achieve in animal models, in cadaveric studies, and then all the way towards the first human surgery neurosurgical case study. And so that was written up and published in the Journal of Neurosurgery.
On this podcast, we've talked about spin in, spin out technologies, bringing things in from other fields. So this is obviously the famous Canada arm. We brought that tech, turned it into a surgical robot. Are there any other examples of kind of technology being developed for space that's used on Earth or vice versa? What are some other examples that you might know about?
My first ever book chapter was called From Orbit to OR, Medical Technologies from Space That Have Benefited Day-to-Day Terrestrial Healthcare. And so, it's rife with examples across the spectrum, from biomonitoring technology to water filtration technology to closed loop life support system technology. So to give you specific examples, when we talk about the spaceflight environment, it really does challenge us to be innovative, because not only do we need to think about the hazards of the spaceflight environment, which includes increased radiation, it includes altered day-night cycles, like we talked about, it includes weightlessness. Every single one of our bodily systems is affected by the microgravity environment. Our bones lose density, our muscles lose mass, our fluids shift upward. So it really, and on top of that, there's design constraints. So we can only bring so much with us. There are heavy launch costs associated with bringing things to space, even if those have come down over the past decade or two. So essentially, when we design for space, things have to be low mass, low volume, low power draw, easy to use, have a long shelf life, and also be of low astronaut time to train on and maintain skills. So, for example, when we talk about water up on the International Space Station, we want to make sure that water's we're recycling it to the utmost, that we're filtering it to the utmost. And so iodine water filtration systems that have been used to provide clean water on the ISS have been spun off to provide clean water in villages in remote Kenya. Closed loop life support systems, the atmospheric scrubbers, again, which provide a clean atmosphere, which ensure that we don't have too much carbon dioxide buildup. Those have been spun off to the produce transport chain to ensure a cleaner atmosphere, which has actually increased the lifespan of produce during the transport chain. Even the early days, from the early days of human spaceflight, probably the Gemini, Mercury era, is really when biometrics and the telemetry that we see used in modern day intensive care units, that's where they got their start.
You've studied wilderness and underwater medicine. Will these types of technologies being developed for space be useful on Earth?
So I have been lucky enough to be a 2-time aquanaut with the Neptune missions. So like everything in space and in exploration, as you're quickly learning, Neptune is an acronym. It stands for Nautical Experiments in Physiology, Technology, and Underwater Exploration. So I did a 5-day underwater mission in 2019 and a 6-day underwater mission last year in 2023. The reason for using underwater habitats as an analog for space is several fold. So we prepare for space by using like environments on Earth, because space, in addition to being dangerous, it's expensive, and we want to retire risk. In finding these test beds that either replicate the weightless environment of space, we do that through parabolic flight. In the Vomit Comet, for example, the underwater environment does replicate some of those same aspects, in that, it is resource limited. You are kind of shut off from the outside world. To get down to your habitat, you have to dive down. And if you want to go outside on your little sortie or your excursion, you have to do so in dive gear. You're always with a buddy. This it really is instrumental for building those crew dynamics, working together as a crew to ensure you achieve your mission objectives. And then for us in particular, it was critical for testing, serving as a test bed for key technologies, which may be used in austere environments and even space at some point. So on my first astronaut mission, so for both my missions, I served as the crew medical officer. And on my first mission, we partnered with a company called Luxonic Technologies
Hmm.
to test the world's first digital twin of the radiology workflow in virtual reality. So that's a lot of
Okay.
technical
Yeah.
jargon, but what that
What is
means.
that?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah. So what that meant is, so if you're a radiologist, typically to be able to read and interpret and mark up and manipulate images, you need to have a setup of high resolution monitors. You need to have the right lighting. It actually takes up a lot of physical space and infrastructure, and you may not always have that. Certainly not underwater. Certainly not up on the space station. And so this company, they took that workflow and then they replicated that in virtual reality. And so when you slip on this headset, you suddenly appear in this radiology reading room, and they've also built in a collaborative component. So, in the simulation that we undertook on the Neptune mission, we had a simulated trauma patient with several complex fractures, and I was able to meet with the head of radiology in Saskatoon, Canada, over 3,600 kilometers away, to review this imaging together in this virtual room. So it really adds the ability to collaborate and access in places that may otherwise not have that capability. And then there's a part two to that, in that there's just so much space-based work to what the company was doing. I was asked to join the company and now work with the company as the VP of Immersive Medicine. And we've
Was
spent
my other question. Let's talk about immersive medicine. What is it? Is
Yeah.
it virtual, living in or doing medicine in a virtual space?
Yeah, so immersive technologies refer to that whole spectrum of our augmented reality, mixed reality, extended reality, virtual reality, 360 video, and they all have their own terms. But basically, it's either adding a digital layer to your existing world, so and allowing you to interact with it. So that on one end of the spectrum is augmented reality. Mixed reality is kind of adding that digital overlay, but maybe a little bit less interactive. And then virtual reality is just immersing yourself in a digital world, being able to interact with that world. And so when we talk about how that impacts resource limited environments, such as remote and rural, where I still practice as an emergency physician, or the spaceflight environment, the portability, the low mass, the low volume factor, the low power draw, allows us to bring a headset with us to, for example, bring radiology capabilities to places that have none. And we also recently won or were a finalist, one of the top 5 finalists in the Canadian Space Agency's Deep Space Healthcare Challenge with Impact Canada. And we developed a mixed reality point of care ultrasound. And basically, on your headset, you have your ultrasound probe, and you're able to see your whole display in front of you as you're scanning your patient. And so now you can at least now you can have the capability to image patients in trauma scenarios, in life or death scenarios.
Now, we made a joke earlier about ordering the neuroarm on Amazon Prime days, but some of this technology is actually available to us now. I remember a few years ago, David St. Jacques, when he was in space, he was wearing an undershirt. It was full of
Yeah.
sensors. You're mentioning, biomonitor.
Astroskin.
Yeah, and we actually had one of those shirts on our MDRS mission in 2018, and it connects to Bluetooth on your phone like your smartwatch would. Gives you a full outreach of like all your
scans your body.
vitals and everything like that, your heart rate, your body temperature.
Yep.
And you can buy this now. We see all these amazing technologies, and we're like, okay, there's VR medicine.
Yep.
But in 5 to 10 years, I mean, this might become normal. We don't know. This is why we're pushing these boundaries. It's crazy how fast things move.
Yeah. No, Astroskin is a great example of a Canadian technology that enhances our abilities to look for biometric anomalies in our subjects. And so there's actually a tie there with some of my work. And so through the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, we worked with the Life Sciences and Astronaut Health Office at the Canadian Space Agency to test that device before David St. Jacques went up in 2018. So we actually tested it in parabolic flight under a spacesuit to see what kind of signal to noise there was with light activity, with heavy activity. We actually took that as one of the payloads for Kelly's mission with Virgin Galactic. And that was the first time that we had a whole set of data from launch to landing across all phases of flight. So not just the
Because you're always
0
wearing
phase.
it. It's just
Yeah,
constantly on.
exactly. So you have access to, you have the data of what your biometrics parameters are doing in hypergravity or in that transition from hypergravity to microgravity. There really is a lot we can learn from integrating technology with human physiology and austere environments.
What a time to be alive.
Right.
I think about that all the time.
Totally.
What do you think about AI? Is AI becoming part of the immersive medicine conversation?
Yeah, I'm loving this conversation because it really emphasizes how aware we need to be of various emerging technologies as well as the intersection point between them. It's one thing to think of digital health, immersive health in their various silos. We are in the age of machine learning and AI applications. It's definitely a huge topic of interest in space medicine and space health. I was down at the NASA Investigators Workshop earlier this year, and it had its own session called Space Medicine Chat GPT. We need to start thinking more about the potential and the pitfalls of how we marry emerging technologies. And so, for example, in immersive, the power of, and especially in immersive imaging and diagnostic imaging, which is where we live
Right.
as Luxonic as a company, pairing that with AI and machine learning for diagnostics, for reducing error rates, for increasing user performance. It's really interesting and it's really critical. And regardless of what sector of healthcare you're in, there are going to be applications of machine learning and AI.
Maybe ChatGPT can find the cures for cancer.
That I think is more than a prompt.
It's really important to think about how different intelligences perceive the same data set. And I did see a headline recently on social media about AI being able to predict breast cancer earlier and with more accuracy than traditional diagnostic methods. And then this is totally out of left field, but speaking of different intelligences, this is about maybe a 10-year-old study now. Thinking about problems in creative ways is a really interesting way to go about problem solving. So in this one study, they took pigeons and they trained them to recognize what cancer looks like on a pathology slide.
I'm going to look that up because that sounds made up, but I'm sure you're telling the truth.
It does sound made up, and every few years I just go back to make sure that study is still quoted. And so then they would reward the pigeons with birdseed whenever they correctly diagnose the path slide with cancer, and they were found that pigeons were able to diagnose as well, if not better, than the average pathologist who has to spend like God knows how many years in medical school.
Did they did little lab coats for the pigeons? They had little like name tags for them.
Well, they had glasses and clipboards too.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, and then
any other way.
The other part of that is when they flock sourced the answers to multiple pigeons, the accuracy improved. I bring that up because it's really critical to think about how we approach problems in really creative ways. What forms of intelligence are there? And actually, I teach in a course called Technology and the Future of Medicine at the University of Alberta. And that's one of the examples I use about thinking differently and novel applications of old ways of thinking.
That's great. That leads me to my next question, actually.
What other animals can we use for medical diagnostics?
How did you know that? That's what I was going to say. No, the main thread throughout the whole season for Albertans in Space is how important education is, and so I'd love to know what has Alberta provided you in terms of your educational support, and now that you're an educator, what does Alberta mean to you?
One important point that I bring up that I was lucky enough to have lived through is find an environment that is supportive of your goals, even if they seem off the beaten path. and that really believes in them and that will remove barriers for you to achieve your goals. And so the perfect example of that was my time at the University of Alberta Medical School, because I probably took more time off than anyone during my preclinical years to attend space conferences, to attend opportunities that would further my interests in medicine and technology and innovation. And they really saw the value of that. The University of Alberta undergraduate medical education branch, they let me take an entire year off before my preclinical years to go down to Silicon Valley and go down to Singularity University and learn about emerging technologies that could positively impact humanity. The best example is at the end of medical school. I was lucky enough to be one of two Canadians sponsored by the Canadian Space Agency to attend NASA Johnson Space Center's Aerospace Medicine elective. And this is an internship that I had had my eye on since high school, but it was only open to senior year medical students and early year residents. And so it was a decade at least before I was eligible. But this is something I really, truly wanted. Luckily enough, I was selected to go down. And it wasn't that it was easy to fit in. It required me missing my entire final month of review for my fourth year comprehensive medical school exam, which is not a small thing to miss. It involved me missing the comprehensive exam. It involved me missing my training and certification in advanced cardiac life support.
Important things that you're missing.
These are super important. And so it's not that I didn't do them. It was that the university and the medical undergraduate office said, we believe in this opportunity. So you are going to study on your own at NASA. You are going to find your own ACLS course to do outside of these hours. We're going to rearrange the comp exam for you, but go down to NASA and live your best life. Spent a lot of time reflecting on that. And I've even written to the dean and the assistant dean, just saying thank you for that. U of A Med School really did make a lot of things happen for me. They believed in the visions. I'm extremely grateful for that. Talking about the technology in the future medicine course. Dr. Kim Phillips, he's a necropathologist at the U of A. We met at Singularity University. And even as a third year med student, he believed in my enthusiasm and belief in the power of technology to do good with medicine. And he asked me to come be a lecturer. And that was oh gosh, I'm dating myself here. That was 13 years ago. I haven't been booted off the lecturing roster yet.
When you run an experiment, let's say in one of these underwater scenarios, and it doesn't go as planned, how do you deal with that?
You have to adapt and overcome. It starts with preparation. It starts with thinking of how, what does success look like? What could be a threat to success? What is the best case, the worst case, the most likely case scenario? Definitely that's what guides my thinking as an emergency physician. What is this most likely to be, but what do I really not want to miss? And then, when things go sideways, and the nature of life is as much as you prepare yourself for suboptimal outcomes, something's going to happen that outsmarts you. And then you have to kind of, not get down and rather, just think about, okay, well, how do I overcome this barrier? And so to your point, we had some really cool experiments on both our Neptune missions. And our first one, we did a salivary cortisol, so measuring the level of stress hormone in our saliva pre, post, and after mission. And the way we store that is in these little tubes, these plastic tubes. But anyone who dives knows that there's a pressure differential between the surface and living underwater. That's where the aquanaut designation comes from. It comes from breathing the ambient pressure, air at ambient pressure at depth when you're in an underwater habitat. And so, the tubes did well on the way down because the air is just getting compressed. But even if you're not overloading them with air on the way down, the air that's in them is going to expand. So we risked making unintentional spit bombs when we were transporting our samples up. And so
did you make intentional spit bombs? Did you just do one?
That would have been frowned upon. So the way we overcame that was realizing, how do we overcome this pressure problem? Is it squeezing the extra air out? Is it kind of leaving these slightly uncapped so that they aren't essentially spit bombs?
What do you think the biggest challenge is for space medicine in next 5, next 10, next 20 years? Does humanity stand a chance to actually live safely in space?
What a great question. There's a lot of challenges in space medicine. So one of them is training and access and opportunities. And so when we talk about my path into space medicine, it's as a researcher. I'm not a clinically trained aerospace medicine practitioner. And that's a matter of opportunity because there are no civilian pathways in Canada towards getting that fellowship. If there were, sign me up. So yeah, it's simply reading and loving the field and, going to conferences and looking for gaps that I personally can solve. And, that happens to be in research and operations and astronautics. We're seeing this worldwide surge of interest as the nature of access to space changes. And so to give you an idea, last 3 years alone, we've seen the rise of the world's first space medicine fellowships. And there's 4 of them now in the United States. So UCLA has one, Mass General in Boston, associated with Harvard, has one, Arizona, I think Texas A&M are the other 2. This really is a whole new era in space medicine. And it's sort of how do we maintain the standards of excellence and critical thinking that are required to keep astronauts safe? The traditional path has been through aerospace medicine, which also focuses heavily on preventative, which is also really critical. And so, keeping, traditionally astronauts at the space agency level have been the healthiest of the healthy. But this kind of segues into the other challenges in space medicine in that the nature of who is going to space changes with the rise of commercial spaceflight. We saw William Shatner as a nonagenarian go to space. That hasn't been done before. Wally Funk at 82 realized her life mission of going to space. Those are not your everyday astronauts.
We put Stephen Hawking's went on the vomit comet, didn't he?
He
That's
did.
that's not an astronaut profile.
Right, exactly. And so now this is great because there's more access to space. We're seeing all manner of health conditions, chronic health conditions, hypertension, diabetes. In fact, with Kelly's mission, we were the first to put a continuous glucose monitor on suborbital flights because we know that orbital flight can lead to changes in glucose metabolism and even prediabetes in astronauts. So, pulling in all these threads and seeing, what other insights are we getting? How do we keep this new generation of the commercial astronauts safe? And what questions can we ask? And then the other novel profile is we're going back to the moon and using the moon as a test bed for Mars. And so we're seeing these ever increasingly distant and complex and ambitious mission profiles. There's the near term, the far term, the changing aspect of access to space, opportunities for education and training in space. And then, as we discussed earlier, emerging technologies like machine learning, like immersive technologies that can help us increase crew's capacity to treat themselves, to be autonomous in space.
Shawna, we have a segment at the end of our episode here called the Albertans in Space book club. It could be fiction, nonfiction. It can be an old favorite and new pick. But the idea is that it's something that our audience can, read, pick up, understand more kind of your background, your feelings about the topic, and more space medicine. So our question is, what is your book for our book club?
This one is going to be very on brand. It is Canadian. It is spacey. It is by an astronaut, and it is, of course, Chris Hadfield's An Astronaut's Guide to Earth. Highly recommend. Chris talks about his lessons learned, both while training to become an astronaut and becoming an astronaut. And he talks about problem solving on the fly. He talks about his famous square astronaut round hole when he's coming back in from an EVA. He talks about, having the humility to never believe in your own hype. And always starting at, the same level of knowledge and as anyone else is in your class when you're learning a new skill. And always, the power of mental preparation for the best and worst case scenarios. And, we talked about a lot of that in this podcast. A lot of my own guiding philosophy is about psychological resilience, that mental grit and fortitude. And, I have entire TED Talks on that, but a lot of that resonates with everything, that Commander Hadfield talks about in his book. And then everything that I live on a day-to-day in the emergency room, in the world of astronautics, preparing yourself for the best and worst case scenario. That positive self-talk, and then just not giving into negativity and having that impulse control. And so, that's a great book for anyone, even if you're not trying to be an astronaut, but you just want tips and tricks for an approach to life that will get you through challenges and hurdles. Highly recommend.
I read this book years ago when it first came out. And there's a part in the book where he talks about, getting tears in his eyes when he was on that space. That gives me nightmares. When you're talking about, you can't prepare for everything and things happen and you got to think on your feet. How does that wrap into space medicine and just being prepared for anything? Being out in space, you can't open up your visor and kind of wipe your eye away like you would if you got dust in it.
Yeah, it's highly frowned upon. If
to open up your spacesuit in space, 100%. Do you have to come up with every single scenario, every single what if thing when you're preparing astronauts for going into space?
That's a great question. Yeah. So Chris Hadfield has this great TED talk on the subject. And basically he was on a spacewalk and there was some sort of a noxious off-gassing that happened from the visor and that was causing this burning sensation, causing him to tear up. And the challenge with tearing up in microgravity is our tears don't fall. They just well up, and by virtue of the cohesive properties of the tears, they just stick together. And so now imagine your eyes full of tears, but you can't blink them away, you can't shake them away, and you need to do critical work outside the space station. It's just a really great example of, how do we adapt and overcome? And so I also teach the IIIF space medicine course. And really we start with principles of wilderness and austere environment medicine, right, where we turn our students into space medical MacGyvers. And it's sort of like, you don't have everything you need with you. How are you going to think creatively to be able to address this problem? So, you have a broken limb, you don't necessarily have a splint. How are you going to make a splint? If you're in the wilderness, how can you use a tree branch? That MacGyver kind of thinking, that resourceful kind of thinking. There's this concept in positive psychology called salutogenesis, and it's sort of rising to the occasion. How can I view this as a growth opportunity? And that kind of thinking, it really does drive success in austere and challenging environments. And it's sort of like not giving in. So that comes back to this idea of not giving in and that impulse control. And so when we talk about, something as nightmare inducing as going blind in space, it's sort of like, stay calm. What is the next step? And what could this mean? And what actions are within my capabilities? And also who may I enlist to be able to help me overcome this problem? So it's a perfect example.
So I just imagine the slideshow. It's not the aliens that are going to get you. It's the crying in space that's really going to
yeah,
the
exactly.
end of you, right? Shawna, thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on, and we will be watching to see you go up into space. We'll be cheering back here from Calgary.
Thank you so much. This is so much fun.
We want to thank Dr. Shawna Pandya for joining us today to share with us her incredible story and her continued journey as a medical research astronaut, physician, and all-around superhero in Alberta and beyond.
Yes.
An inspiration for a lot of young women who have dreamt of saving the world. It's not out of reach. Dare to dream the impossible, even when the heaviest of obstacles get in the way and condition you to feel otherwise. It is during these moments when you truly see your character, your authentic self, and the power that you yield to become unstoppable.
If you'd like to follow Shawna along her space exploration journey, she has such a significant presence on social media. You can find her on Instagram, X, Twitter, at Shawna Pandya. Shout out to Sandralynn for her writing and research efforts. Nick, our sound engineers, 6 Degrees Music and Sound. Brett, our DOP camera, for helping us make this podcast sound and look amazing.
In our next and final episode of the season, middle school teacher Amanda Green from Beaumont, Alberta will be joining us. Mm-hmm. So sad, it's the last episode.
It's going to be our last one. Thank you so much for watching Albertans in Space. We hope you enjoyed the show today. Albertans in Space is available to watch on Optic TV and through our YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and like button. We appreciate your support. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Albertans in Space _podcast.
See you next week.
Bye.